My name is Rachel, and I never thought I'd spend my 30th birthday with a suitcase at my feet and my parents telling me to get out. I always believed birthdays were about love, a cake with crooked candles, maybe a warm hug, a quiet reminder that you mattered. But that night, I came home from a long shift, balancing a store-bought cake in one hand and a tired smile on my face, only to find a packed bag by the front door. My father, Mark, didn't even glance up from his recliner. "It's time, Rachel. You're too old to be living here rent-free," he muttered, swirling the whiskey in his glass. My mother, Diane, stood in the kitchen, eyes downcast, nervously twisting a dish towel between her fingers. For a moment, I stood frozen. I wanted to remind them that I wasn't freeloading. I'd been paying the electric bill, the internet, even chipping in on the mortgage. I fixed the car when Dad's broke down. I picked up groceries when Mom couldn't. But when I opened my mouth, no words came out. That night, I carried the cake upstairs to my childhood bedroom and stared at the small flickering candle I'd lit for myself. No singing, no laughter, just a dull ache in my chest and a quiet bitter thought. If they wanted me gone, maybe they needed to know what life without me really looked like. I pulled into the driveway just as the last light faded from the sky, the cold creeping in under my jacket as I stepped out of the car. My name is Rachel, and it was my 30th birthday, a day I'd tried to ignore all week, telling myself it was just another Wednesday. Still, a part of me had hoped, deep down, that there would be a card on the table, maybe a small cake, or at least a happy birthday from Mom or Dad. But when I opened the front door, the house was heavy with silence. The smell of reheated meatloaf drifted from the kitchen, mingling with the soft hum of the old refrigerator. My father, Mark, sat in his recliner, eyes fixed on the TV, a half-empty glass of whiskey resting on his knee. My mother, Diane, moved around the kitchen, scraping leftovers into a Tupperware container without looking up. "Hey," I called softly, forcing a small smile as I set the store-bought cake down on the counter. No one turned. No one answered. Dinner was already over. The plates sat on the table, their contents picked over and cold. I stood there for a moment, hands awkwardly at my sides, feeling like a guest in a house I'd called home for 3 decades. Finally, Mark cleared his throat, not taking his eyes off the screen. "You're late." My mouth tightened. "I had to finish some things at work," I said quietly. I didn't expect a happy birthday, not really. But the hollow air stung more than I wanted to admit. I pulled out a chair at the table, not sure if I was supposed to join them or disappear. Diane glanced at me once, then quickly turned back to the dishes. Mark shifted in his chair, muttering under his breath. Then, without warning, he spoke louder. "You're 30 now, Rachel." I froze. He turned his head slightly, just enough for me to see the set of his jaw. "You can't keep living here like this. It's time you figured your life out." My stomach twisted. I forced my voice to stay calm. "Dad, I pay the electric bill. I cover half the mortgage. I've been helping with groceries, the car repairs, the internet." He let out a short, sharp laugh. "A few bills don't buy you a lifetime stay." I glanced at Mom, hoping for something. But she kept her head down, wiping the counter, as if she hadn't heard a word. There it was. Simple, cold, rehearsed. My throat felt tight, but I swallowed hard and nodded slowly, as if my body knew better than to argue. I climbed the stairs slowly, the house creaking under each step. My childhood bedroom door was half open, and as I pushed it wide, the sight hit me like a slap. There, by the bed, was my old blue suitcase. Packed. Ready. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, staring at it, letting the shock ripple through me in waves. Part of me wanted to laugh. It was almost comical how thorough they were. Not even a conversation. Not even a fight. Just a packed bag and a closed door. I moved into the room and sat on the edge of the bed, my fingers brushing against the quilt I'd had since I was a teenager. The walls still had the faded posters from college. The bookshelf still crammed with paperbacks I never got around to donating. But in that moment, none of it felt like mine. I thought about all the nights I'd stayed late at work, the extra shifts I'd picked up to help them cover their debts, the sacrifices I'd made to keep this house standing. And yet, here I was. 30 years old, and somehow still disposable. There were no tears, no begging, no dramatic shouting match. Just a quiet acceptance, like slipping into cold water. I stood, smoothed my hands over the suitcase, and began gathering the few things they hadn't packed. A photo frame, a worn sweater, my laptop charger. Each item felt like a goodbye. Downstairs, the TV droned on, laughter tracks echoing through the walls. My parents didn't call after me. They didn't ask if I needed help. As I zipped the suitcase shut, a strange sense of peace settled over me. This house had never really been mine. And tonight, I understood that leaving wasn't the tragedy I thought it would be. It was a beginning I should have claimed years ago. I sat on the edge of my bed, fingers brushing absently over the old quilt, as my eyes wandered around the room. The pale blue walls, the dented dresser, the bookshelf with paperbacks stacked too deep. It was all familiar, but suddenly, it felt like a stranger's space. My name is Rachel, and on the night of my 30th birthday, I realized I had never truly belonged here. As the muffled sounds of the television drifted upstairs, my mind began to wander backward, tracing the quiet years of sacrifice that had slipped through my fingers like water. I remembered the winter Dad's car broke down on the side of the highway, stranded in the snow. I was only 23, barely making above minimum wage, but I drained my savings to cover the repairs. He barely mumbled a thank you, more annoyed at the inconvenience than grateful for the help. Then there was the spring the roof started leaking. Mom called me in a panic, rain pouring into the kitchen. I was the one on the ladder in the freezing rain, hammering down shingles, while Dad sat inside with a beer, cursing at the TV. And the hospital bills. Oh, the bills. When Mom's blood pressure spiked and she landed in the ER, I was the one who swiped my card, watching my emergency fund drain away without hesitation. I told myself it was what family did. But tonight, staring at that packed suitcase, it all collapsed into focus. I stood and turned slowly, letting my eyes sweep across the room. The walls were dotted with nail holes from old posters, the closet half empty, the air tinged with a faint smell of laundry detergent and old books. I realized then, with a quiet ache in my chest, that this room had been a resting place, not a home. For years I'd told myself that if I just gave enough, sacrificed enough, I could earn a seat at the table. That one day, my parents would look at me, not as a burden or a backup plan, but as a daughter they were proud of. But that was the real lie, wasn't it? I exhaled slowly, a calm I hadn't expected settling over me. If they wanted me to go, then I would go. But they were about to learn what life without me truly meant. I reached under my bed and pulled out my laptop, the familiar glow of the screen warming the room in a way my parents' silence never had. My fingers moved on instinct, logging in, opening tabs, scrolling through accounts I knew better than my own reflection. First stop, the utilities. I navigated to the electric company's website, fingers steady as I canceled autopay and removed my card from the account. A soft chime confirmed the change. Next came the water bill, then the internet. Each click felt like peeling away another layer of obligation, an invisible weight lifting from my shoulders. Then I opened the bank account, the one Mom insisted we keep for emergencies, but somehow only ever benefited them. My hands trembled once, then steadied as I transferred the remaining balance into my private savings, the account I had quietly opened months ago when the first cracks had begun to show. Finally, the credit card, the one Dad used for gas, groceries, the occasional night out, all under the pretense of family expenses. I pulled up the account, hovered over the Remove Authorized User button, and pressed it firmly. There was no anger in the motion, no spite. Just a quiet, necessary reclaiming of the life I had almost forgotten was mine. The room felt different now, not warmer, but clearer. I set the laptop aside and let out a long breath, feeling my shoulders sink, the tight coil in my chest slowly unspooling. Downstairs, the laugh track of some sitcom floated up the stairs, a sharp contrast to the stillness in my room. For the first time in years, I felt the first hint of something I hadn't known I was missing. Peace. Not the peace of a perfect family or a tidy life, but the kind of peace that comes when you stop waiting for people to choose you and start choosing yourself. The next morning, I woke to the harsh vibration of my phone on the nightstand. My eyes were heavy with exhaustion, but the knot in my stomach tightened before I even reached for the screen. 16 missed calls. My parents, my Aunt Linda, Uncle Rob, even a few cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. My voicemail inbox was full. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the play button, before curiosity got the better of me. First message. Mom. Voice shaking. Rachel, there's something wrong with the bank card. I can't pay for groceries. Call me back, please. We can talk about this. Second message. Dad. Voice tight with anger. You think you're clever, huh? You won't survive out there without family. Call me. Third message. Aunt Linda. Rachel, how could you do this to your parents after everything they've done for you? We're all so disappointed. I set the phone down and let out a shaky breath. My hands were cold, but under the anxiety was something steadier, like steel sliding into place. This was what came next, I realized. This was the storm after the storm. I packed my suitcase quietly, zipping it closed, as the first light broke through the blinds. The house was silent, except for the occasional creak of the floorboards and the muffled sounds of the TV still playing downstairs. I walked down the stairs without a word, slipped out the front door, and didn't look back. Nora opened her apartment door with a sleepy smile and a wide yawn. You're here, she said softly, pulling me into a tight hug. I hadn't realized how much I needed that until her arms wrapped around me. Her place was small, one bedroom, a tiny kitchen, a couch barely big enough for two, but it felt like a palace. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking on eggshells. We spent the afternoon unpacking my things into a corner of the living room. I applied for jobs online, polished up an old resume, and even laughed when Nora handed me a chipped coffee mug and said, "Welcome to freedom, roommate." I hadn't realized how heavy my old life was until I started setting it down piece by piece. But the world has a way of following you, even when you walk away. By the third day, the phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from an old coworker. Hey, your dad's been posting about you on Facebook. You okay? My stomach dropped. I hesitated before tapping the link, half afraid of what I'd see. There it was, plastered across the town's Facebook group. My ungrateful daughter walked out on us in our time of need. Dad's post read, "We gave her everything, and now she's abandoned her family. Please pray for us." Hundreds of comments flooded in. Some offered sympathy. Others were sharper. What kind of child does that to her parents? Disgusting. Parents sacrifice everything. Kids these days have no loyalty. For a moment, I sat frozen on Nora's couch, the noise of judgment crashing over me. My chest tightened. Maybe I was the villain. Maybe I had gone too far. Nora sat down next to me, reading over my shoulder. She reached over and gently took the phone from my hands. "Breathe," she said softly. The next morning, the whispers in town started changing. An old neighbor sent me a message. "I remember you fixing the roof alone in the rain while your dad yelled from the porch. Don't let them twist this." A former teacher. "You were always the one helping your parents when they couldn't help themselves. I'm proud of you for walking away." It turned out people had been watching all along. They had seen the sacrifices, the quiet endurance, the years I spent stitching a family together by myself. They just hadn't said anything. Until now. One evening, Nora and I walked downtown, the autumn air crisp and cool. We passed neighbors on the street, some nodding quietly, others offering small knowing smiles. For years, I'd carried the weight of silence, thinking no one saw, no one cared, no one understood. But under the soft glow of the streetlights, I realized the truth. The world had been watching, and many of them had been waiting for me to choose myself. For the first time in a long time, I let myself believe something gentle and strange. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. The official letter came on a Monday morning, slipped under Nora's door. My name stamped neatly on the front, the courthouse address in the corner. I sat at the kitchen table, the autumn sun pouring through the window, hands trembling slightly as I slid my finger under the seal. The words blurred together at first, but the meaning was unmistakable. My parents were suing me. The charges were laughable if they hadn't been so cruel. Abandonment, neglect of elderly parents, emotional harm. For a long moment, I sat frozen, heart hammering against my ribs. Then, slowly, I let the letter fall to the table and pressed my hands to my face. But I didn't cry. Not this time. I gathered the paperwork that night. Bank statements, receipts, emails, years of electric bills paid in my name, mortgage payments pulled from my account, repairs covered with money I should have been saving for myself. Each document was a memory. Each line item, a quiet act of love that had gone unnoticed, unthanked. Nora helped me organize everything into a folder. She didn't ask questions. She just sat beside me, her calm presence, a quiet reminder that I wasn't alone. The day of the hearing, I walked into the courthouse with the folder clutched to my chest. My parents were already there, my father stiff in his chair, jaw clenched, my mother dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. They looked up as I entered, and for a brief second, something twisted in my chest. But it didn't last. I sat down, took a deep breath, and waited. When it was my turn, I spoke calmly, my voice steady as I laid out the facts. I explained the years of financial support, the endless bills, the overtime shifts, the sacrifices. I offered no anger, no accusations, just the truth, laid bare for everyone to see. Across the room, my father's face darkened with fury, his fists clenching on the table. My mother sniffled louder, her shoulders shaking. But I didn't break. As I looked at them, something inside me shifted, hardening into something sharp and clear. For years, I had let them define who I was. The dutiful daughter, the caregiver, the one who never said no. But in that moment, as the judge flipped through my stack of evidence, I realized they no longer had that power. They didn't get to define me anymore. When the ruling came, it was swift and decisive. The judge dismissed their claims, citing overwhelming evidence that I had been their primary support for years. There was no room for argument, no space for further games. As we left the courthouse, the autumn air hit me like a baptism, cool, crisp, and full of quiet possibility. The trees lining the street had turned to golden red, their leaves drifting down like soft confetti. I paused at the top of the steps, closing my eyes and letting the wind brush against my face. For the first time in my life, I felt untethered, not lost, not adrift, but free. I didn't look back as my parents exited behind me, their voices low and hurried. I didn't wait for them to call my name, didn't search their faces for regret or apology. That part of the story was over. As I walked down the courthouse steps, the crunch of leaves under my boots sounded like the turning of a page, and for the first time in 30 years, I was ready to write the next chapter on my own. I moved into my own apartment on a quiet street lined with old brick buildings and rustling trees. It was small, a one-bedroom with creaky floors and drafty windows, but it was mine. I spent the first few days painting the walls a soft pale blue, the color of open skies and deep breaths. I bought second-hand furniture from thrift shops, a worn-in couch with sun-faded cushions, a wobbly little table with mismatched chairs, a chipped mug that became my favorite for morning coffee. With every piece I placed, every corner I cleaned, the apartment began to feel like a home. For the first time in years, I could breathe. One afternoon while unpacking the last box, I found it, a tiny birthday candle, the one I had tucked away on that night. Everything changed. My fingers paused over it, and for a long moment, I just stared. It was small, almost laughable, bent slightly at the base. But to me, it was more than wax and wick. It was survival. I placed it on a shelf above my desk, not as a symbol of pain, but as proof of what I had overcome. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across my apartment, I stood by the window and looked out at the night unfolding. The city lights blinked softly in the distance. Stars flickered awake in the sky, and a quiet truth settled in my chest. Family is not supposed to break you. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away. Sometimes the most powerful form of love is the one you give yourself. I pressed my palm against the cool glass and whispered softly, I am enough. I am strong enough, good enough, to live a life worth living. And for the first time in my life, I truly believed it.